Now I'd like to introduce this afternoon's keynote, Karen Martin. Karen is a leading authority on lean management and business performance, and she's the author of the Shingo Prize-winning book, The Outstanding Organization. We're very excited today because Karen has agreed that she'll cover topics addressed in her next book, Clarity First. Karen's pragmatic approach to business excellence focuses on developing 4 fundamental organizational behaviors: clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement. Once instilled into an organization's DNA, these behaviors open the door to sustainable growth, greater profit, and a deeply embedded workforce. Karen is the second of our 5 keynotes with deep, rich lean experience. In fact, many of you have likely participated in one of her workshops at AME events or past conferences. Karen's belief in the vital role that clarity plays in achieving excellence will help you look at continuous improvement from a new perspective. Please join me in welcoming Karen Martin.
Everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Where am I? Clarity. It's an interesting thing. It's what's needed no matter what type of excellence you seek. It's what athletes are good at. It's what the military is good at. It's what some businesses are good at, and we can always get better. Ambiguity is the opposite of clarity, in my opinion, and ambiguity is a very draining force. When you have to figure things out and you have to do extra work just to get your actual work done, it doesn't feel very good, and it's not very productive, and it costs a lot of money, and it causes safety problems, and it can cause worse business problems than even that. Most of all, it drags down morale. So what I'd like to talk with you a little bit this afternoon about is how to see the levels of clarity you've got and what to do about it if you see that indeed you have opportunities to improve. The good news is lean management principles, practices, and tools have it all for us. It's there for our taking. And so no matter where you are on the lean journey, no matter if you're just starting or haven't even started yet and you're here to learn, or you're advanced 10, 15 years, 20 years in the journey, there's always more we can do. And especially those of you who've been at it for a while, we are seeing plenty of evidence that there's more that we can do to deepen, especially the practices of lean that help enable clarity. But before we get going, let's go back a little bit and take a look at what clarity is really all about. It is human nature to want clarity. It's in our DNA. We crave clarity. We actually crave clarity in such fundamental levels, and we've been without it sometimes for so long that we forget that we were actually born craving clarity. Think about little kids. Audience participation. What's the #1 question kids ask? Why? Why, mommy? Why, daddy? Why, sister? Why, brother? To the point where sometimes parents get a little drained of that question. Do you? And what happens when parents get drained and kind of tired of the question why? Little by little, there's these subtle little messages that question's not worth asking. Or it's going to get you a little bit of a slap in the hand, or maybe just a little, look, my mother was one. You know, I asked why a lot, and she's like, oh, you exhaust me. And, you know, if you're a parent, you do know how exhausting it can be to hear why. What's the second question kids ask all the time? Second most popular. Why not? So what has happened to us? What happened to us that suddenly we get into a business environment as an adult and we're not programmed to ask those questions like we used to? What has happened to us? Well, I already mentioned one thing. Our parents can be the ones responsible for this. And if you take a look at a little kid when you don't answer that question, or you actually overtly say, no, you don't need to know that, or say, because I said so, this is what happens. Little kids don't hide their feelings. They don't stuff things down. We do. As adults, we stuff down all the time. Say that 3 times quickly. We don't really even realize how much we're craving this innate need that we've got, and we just shove it down and think it's going to be okay. But it's not okay. It is never okay. And what Lean is asking us to do, and what I think a lot of us haven't thought about, is it's asking us to reignite that clarity that we crave and kind of demand it. Go out there and demand to have clarity. The stakes don't have to be real high. You can get clarity in subtle and professional ways, and it will help you soar, you individually as leaders and improvement professionals, and you as organizations. What clarity is the fuel. What's behind that is curiosity. You wouldn't need to seek clarity if you weren't curious. And yet, when you think about the subtle little societal messages that we've been getting about curiosity, it's also not good. Curiosity killed the cat. Well, that's not good. That was and it still is, a very common phrase, and it just sends a subtle message that if you're a curious sort, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And we even had a very explicit example of this with Curious George. How many people read Curious George or read it to their kids? Curious George always got himself in trouble when he sought clarity and when he was curious. He got himself in trouble. Usually the man with the yellow hat would come and save him, and he would get out of his trouble, and he would go on his next adventure. He never did stop being curious, but the subtle message there is that curiosity is going to get you in trouble. So what we have to do, take classic problem solving, it's all about being curious. It's all about being humble and curious and wanting to know why no matter what it reveals. The risk of not knowing is far worse than the risk of knowing, no matter how bad the news is. Lack of clarity costs a lot of money, in addition to draining morale. The Mars climate orbiter in September 23rd, 1999 was supposed to be a wonderful day. Everyone was thrilled that they were finally getting this piece of amazing machinery off into orbit after 5 years of development, probably more so with the design phase and all of that. But 5 hard years, $125 million piece of machinery, and it goes up, and bam, they lose contact. After they lost contact, of course, they did a good dose of root cause analysis and problem solving. And what did they find? 2 engineering groups. Lack of clarity about specifications. One engineering group working in English measures and measurement, imperial measurement, and one working in the metric measurement system. Mars orbiter got too close to the atmosphere and burned up. The next several years later, they launched another one, and it too was a failed mission. So not only did NASA lose a ton of money, possibly billions of years of research, a pretty big black eye that took a while to recover from, lack of clarity, that lack of specification, clarity on that specification created that kind of a sore spot in our history. And more recently, we have the Samsung Galaxy Note 7, and the news as of yesterday was that there was a incomplete root cause analysis. Now this is yet to be proven out in lots of details, but incomplete root cause analysis that led to where we're at now. So what happened was there was a bulge in the batteries that came from Samsung, and there was no bulge initially, with the quick check they did, on the other batteries. So they assumed that the problem was the Samsung batteries, started the recall, started reissuing phones with the non-Samsung batteries, and guess what happened? They too had a problem. So now the product's been pulled. So the media pressures you, the media is asking you to respond. We all understand what that's like. We watched the Toyota recall situation, which was very similar in tone. And yet, just that lack of clarity could have saved them a little bit. Maybe not all of it, but a little bit. We really have to stop being pushed by the machine to rush. We have to stop being pushed and start kind of putting our foot down and saying, no, darn it, we need to find out what's really going on here. Enough of these Band-Aids, enough of wrong decisions. We've got to figure it out. Another thing that can happen is you can be so blindsided by disruption in your industry that you think sometimes that you don't see it coming, but yet historically, every time we hear about disruption that was really pretty painful, it was actually known if we paid attention to it. So recently there was a company that lost a $200 million contract, one of their largest. Stock tanked. They said that they didn't know that the customer was so annoyed with them. They said that they didn't know early enough that the customer was that annoyed with them. And they did do some intervention and try to remediate, but it was too little too late. What they lacked was the clarity about what their customer really, really thought about them. Not what the survey said, not what the employees were telling the CEO, what the customer actually felt and what their experience actually was. So what we want to do is be careful that we don't get ourselves into a situation where we're not asking the right questions and asking questions about questions. One of the most powerful things that I heard from another speaker a while ago that I started adopting, that I recommend you all try it out and see how it works for you, is when someone asks you a question and you don't quite know why they're asking you the question, ask them in a very kind way, out of a spirit of humility and curiosity. Why are you asking that question? I'm curious. Wow, what you learn. And you answer so much more correctly and precisely based on knowing the answer to why they're asking that question. Highly recommend it. It's fascinating to ask that question to people. So what we need in order to embrace this quest for clarity and to allow our curiosity to come out anywhere, anytime, whenever we don't have clarity and we want it, is we need a very healthy dose of humility and that childlike curiosity. We've tamped it down, we need to bring it back up. What that will enable us to do is fight the actual thing that's causing us from not seeking clarity. And that is fear. So when I started working on this book, I was doing all kinds of research about lack of clarity and mental models and frameworks and everything. And at that early stage, I really felt that there were two big reasons, fear and rushing. Because rushing is always it's just never a good thing when you're rushing and not taking time to stop and ask and clarify and get clear. But when I started studying rushing, I actually found out that rushing was somewhat threaded in fear. Fear that we won't get the project done on time. Fear that someone will yell at us if we don't get the project done on time. Fear that we'll be asking a stupid question. There's all kinds of fear that keeps us from asking what we are rightfully deserving of knowing in order to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve as an individual or as a company. So, take a look at this. How many dots do you see? Quickly, yeah, shout it out. 4? 7, 3. Okay, some of you see 12. You're good. Those of you that see 12 have really good eyes and really good peripheral vision. The further back you are in the room, the more likely it is you see all 12. Most people cannot see all 12 at one time, even after knowing that there are 12 there. Because of the lattice work, that lattice work represents noise. And we have all kinds of noise we deal with every day of our lives, both personally and at work. There's noise about competing priorities. There's noise about trying to get data, not sure what the data is really telling you. There's noise when you've got all kinds of pressures on you to produce at a pace that you're not really comfortable producing. There's noise. But when you take away the noise, which, by the way, many of the lean principles, practices, and tools are designed to do, this is good news, you clearly see the 12 dots. You can clearly see things that you can't otherwise see. So when you think about what kinds of things you need in order to really achieve the level of excellence that you're looking for, there are personal and there are organizational needs. On a personal level, everyone needs to take a very close look at how they think, how they feel, or what they say, and what they do. And what you'll find if you start getting very reflective and pay very close attention to your behaviors, try to become that third party watching you, what you'll find is that you're often thinking things before you've really tapped into how you're feeling. And so this is another thing I'd like to offer, a statement that you can ask, or a question you can ask the teams that you're working with, especially if you're actually talking about improvement. How does this feel to you? What are you feeling right now? You know, I don't know what happened in the 80s. There was this whole big thing about, oh, don't talk about feelings. It's work. Work is a personal thing. That phrase, it's not personal, it's work. Baloney. Work is personal. We're there a long time. So starting to ask people how they're feeling about something and getting kind of them tuned in with their own feelings will give you and them a level of clarity that you've never had before. Getting clear on how you're thinking is a whole different animal. Getting clear on how you're thinking about something sometimes most of the time requires you to slow down, stop, listen, be, stop doing, be. And you can have that take whatever form you want it to take. In my case, I like walking meditation. Some of you might like to just be quiet. Some of you might like to listen to hard rock, heavy metal rock and roll. Maybe that's your way of just, chilling out and being. But whatever it is, you owe it to yourselves, you owe it to your teams, you owe it to your company, you owe it to your employees, you owe it to your spouses, you owe it to your friends to be more clear about how you're feeling and how you're thinking. And you're not going to do it if you keep go, like a pinball machine, bing, 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 bing. You've got to slow down. And it's not easy to do in this chop world. We want to get things done. It's not easy to take that time. But, this is where excellence really starts going up. You start really soaring when you do allow yourselves the freedom and frankly, the need to take that time to slow down. Now, behaving, acting, and talking is a whole other thing. So in most organizations, we often will see leaders. Apologies to any leaders in the room who I might offend, but I speak the truth, I try to, and what we see are a fair number of leaders who talk about lean and actually are really well-read and maybe have been to lots of conferences, and they get it, they understand what's needed, they understand what it's about, but they're not practicing it. People don't care what you think, they don't care what you say, they care what you do. If you're not modeling lean behaviors on a regular basis, they're not going to see it as being valuable. And that means, leaders, you have to get out of those offices and go to the Gemba. Still seeing very advanced lean companies where leaders are not practicing going to the Gemba on a regular basis. Two kinds of Gemba: going to KPI boards and having conversations about the goals and the objectives and how they're being achieved. And the other form of Gemba is just going out to find out how things are going and what kinds of obstacles the workers are dealing with that they need help getting rid of. So you need to take a look at the clarity that you have in how you feel, how you think, what you say, and what you do. Now, organizationally, this is where it gets fun, because we have, again, all the lean principles, practices, and tools that we need. So, divided into purpose, priorities, process, performance, and people. There are more, and there are some subsets of those, like problem solving is under performance. Let's take a look at what we've got in our arsenal to help us achieve clarity. Purpose. So purpose is one of those kind of, everyone knows what purpose means and everything, and yet we don't really see a lot of clarity around purpose. Like even this morning, when Kaplan did that exercise, it was fascinating to really think about, why we're here, what we're here to do, and how we show up, and all those things. It was fascinating. So the whole question about why is interesting, and why needs to be asked at all levels of the organization. Certainly, why are we doing what we're doing? Most of the time, employees are very, very clear on the product, whether it's a good or a service, but they're not necessarily clear on why they're doing it unless they're in healthcare, social services, something that has a really strong tie to people's hearts and their souls and minds. They're usually more clear on why. But if you take a good environment like manufacturing, it's critical that your whole workforce understands why you produce that. What does that do for your customer? What value is it really adding to the customer? And it's usually what the customer's doing with it that is the key to where you're adding value and why you're doing what you do. How does that make the customer's life easier? When you get everyone in an organization very, very clear about that, and most are not, amazing things happen. You get people that just want to do, they want to put in the extra effort, they understand what they're there for, and it's a very kind of high performance type of thing. The other thing is, why is not just about organizational clarity on why you do what you do. Why is something you should be answering. Why does this improvement matter? Why are we working on this? It needs to be very clear to everyone involved why this is a problem. Why is that gap important? Why solve that now? Meetings. We've been at this meeting management thing since the 70s, I think, maybe even the 60s, on, good meeting management skills. And yet, most meetings, there's no objective. Why are we meeting? What are we really here to do? And again, when you get people understanding the reason for everything, then you can just soar through that meeting and get clarity and get things done and get resolution and get follow-up, and things happen when people are clear about why. So be more conscious about answering that question why all the time for every level of the organization. Priorities. So we have a wonderful tool practice, I'll call it a practice, Hoshin Conry, Hoshin planning, strategy deployment, whatever you'd like to call it. It is phenomenal when done properly. It is the most clarifying strategic tool we've seen that I've known of, at least in my years of doing this kind of work. It's a very clarifying tool. And if you don't have a company that has embraced it at the senior-most levels, you can use strategy deployment for your department, your division, your work group. It's all about achieving focus through clear priorities and doing fewer things at once and learning to say no, not yet, and not now. So when you take a look at your direction, most organizations are kind of like that pinball machine. So we model the behavior in an organization that happens to people's minds working in the organization when they're bang, bang, bang all over the place. And some of you have probably heard this story from David Meyer at University of Michigan, studied engineers. And he found that engineers typically switch tasks, he called it switch tasking, not multitasking, 5 to 8 times per day. And every time they switched tasks, it was about an average of a 20-minute delay for them to get their mind ramped back up to whatever they had their mind on before. And the longer or the more complicated the task, the longer the time, the simpler the task, the shorter the time. When you think about the number of priorities organizations attempt to achieve, except for some of you out there that are really, really good at strategy deployment, and there are a few companies that are very, very good at it, and it's top all the way down to the front lines as it should be ultimately. When you get that many people aligned around what you're going to work on now and what you're going to say no to or not now to, you can get so many more results per unit time. So if you take a year and you say, we're going to do 12 things this year, most organizations can't achieve those 12 things, assuming they're pretty big. But if the next year, so maybe they'll achieve 3. So the next year, if you say, we're going to achieve 5, and work on fewer at one time, wrap them, and then move on to the next one, then you're able to get all 5 done, and so 5 beats 3, and the rest is history. And the employees are usually far more happy because they've been able to not have to be the pinball machine going back and forth, but you have to get clear on what matters right now. Not next year, not even last year, what matters now. And that level of clarity will really help us. So again, we've got the tools, we just have to use them. The next thing is, in process, there's quite a number of things. So one of the things I've been fascinated by is the lack of written standard work. Manufacturing, certainly in production, has a much, much better track record on this, much better. But boy, you get outside of manufacturing, and there is very little written standard work. That's not good. And the thing that we always hear is, well, it's art. We can't codify art. Yes, you can. You can codify the steps in a process that are non-negotiable and then allow for variation in between them because that world is a very high variation world. But, here we are this many years into the lean management wave, and yet, wow, so many organizations don't have standardized work that's written and clear. New hires come into organizations expecting to be able to, just like do their job, And they're going around hearing the gossip mill about how you do this work, and sitting next to people and having to remember, some people aren't even auditory learners. They're very visual. And so if they don't have a written procedure for how things should happen, it's very difficult for someone to become very good at their work. So the process world is kind of intriguing that there's not this many years later. I mean, we've started this in the 50s. And so this is something that I would, offer as a challenge to you, to make this a very high priority, to start getting processes not only documented, but then having metrics that they're measured against and monitored, and someone owning it, and them continuously improved. Continuous improvement is for everyone, and it's important to do that. Now, this metric was first put forth by Bo Keat and Drew Locker in their book, The Complete Lean Enterprise, in 2004. And it is the most powerful metric I think I've ever met. It is very, very powerful. Mike Osterling, who I work with a lot, calls it the hidden beast. The hidden beast, in office and service especially. So what percent complete and accurate is, it's kind of like your first pass yield in manufacturing. And it's a bit of a squishy metric, so admittedly a squishy metric, but how you get it is you ask the recipient of, upstream works being passed downstream, you ask the recipient what percentage of the time do they receive work that is correct and accurate, meaning it needs no rework. Now, Bo and Keat defined rework as needing to be corrected or missing information added that should have been supplied. Mike and I, when we were playing around with it initially, we found that there was a third type of rework that was even more common in many settings, and that's clarification. So what we found was people were spending inordinate amounts of time going back and clarifying, which is a form of rework. It's already been, the information's been submitted, and now they're going back and asking again for it to be clarified. Now, we're not suggesting that you shouldn't clarify. We're suggesting you should get rid of the need to clarify. Here's the powerful thing about this. When you look at the quality of in-process output going down, I'll do it this way, going downstream, and you look at and ask the recipients of that work, what percentage of the time are you able to do your work without having to correct, add, or clarify? What happens is it actually heals relationships. What we find very often when you get cross-functional teams together, there's some sort of tension between, two or more parties in the room, and it's almost always because they're like, they just can never give me what I need, and it's like this annoyance about the quality of the information that's coming downstream, and they're having to go back and clarify much of the time. But until they've been in the same room having the conversation about what the customer, in this case, the in-process customer's needs really were or are, the upstream supplier never even knew. They've never had that conversation. So what happens is this kind of like, oh, that's what you do with it. Well, yeah, I can supply that. And it becomes a long-standing healing. So, one of the goals in life is to have people that can have spirited conversation about things that matter, but then they go back to being really good friends. That's what we're trying to achieve in business and in life, is the ability to question things, but then the ability to be able to, go back and get along. And departments that don't get along, leaders that don't get along, individuals that don't get along, it's not good for business. It's okay, and you should have these disagreements and stand your ground on what's right from your perspective, but not to the level that this kind of clarification, correcting, and adding, the angst, the organizational angst it creates is significant. So another recommendation is to start playing around with this metric. You can use it at a value stream level, you can use it at a process level, and start asking the recipients of work what percentage of the time they're having to clarify or correct or add, and you'll be surprised at how common this problem is, the hidden beast. So when you, one more thing, when you ask the downstream customer of the work what their experience is, one thing that you want to understand too is that there could be people 2 or 3 chains away that are experiencing the need to clarify information that was actually produced all the way upstream, and that can also be a valid reason to clarify the work that's being passed down the stream. The next thing is performance. So we tend to lack clarity around performance in a pretty big way. So again, manufacturing on the production floor, usually a little bit better at knowing what the target is and where they are, and there's usually some pretty good, huddles and people looking at these things. But man, you get outside of your manufacturing practices, assuming you've got them well wired there, they're probably not well wired hardly anywhere else. There's probably not decent KPIs that have been identified. There's probably not decent visual boards that are there. There's probably not that level of clarity on how do we know how we're doing? Are we doing well? Are we ahead? Are we behind? Where should we be? What's good look like? What's success look like? Most organizations lack that quite a bit. So if you think about going to a football game, and think about a quarterback snapping the ball, or they snap the ball, the quarterback goes back, throw a Hail Mary, receiver's running down there, catches the ball, but maybe bobbles a little bit, runs into the end zone. You're on your feet, woo! What's the first thing you do after that? Look at the scoreboard. Why? You just saw it happen. Why do you look at the scoreboard? Confirmation, validation that you saw what you saw, and looking again, what's the score? Where am I? Are we winning or are we losing? Business is a lot like sports. And oftentimes we have no idea when you go into work areas, are they winning, are they losing, what's going on? And so what you want to do is create this ability for everyone to be able to see at one time, and this. This is classic lean thinking. This is what we've learned from the beginning. But it's not out there a whole lot. So this is another challenge, is that we need to get better at getting those visual boards in place. They're foundational for high performance. Foundational. What if a football team had no ability to know what down it was, what yard line they were on? I mean, that would be chaos, right? If they had no idea what was going on, what would happen if they didn't know what the next play was? And yet, that's what we do to ourselves a lot of the time. So the need to be clear about where are we at this moment in time is huge. And it satisfies that innate need we've got for clarity. People want to know, even if it's bad news, they want to know how they're doing. They want to know how the organization is doing. So it's important to be able to provide that for them. Value stream mapping. So many of you are pros at this. Some of you are probably mapping at a little bit of a lower level with lower level people than what we kind of posit. We posit that senior leaders are in the best position to create strategic decisions around value streams and how they should be run and operate. And then once that strategy is set, the baton is indeed passed to the front lines, middle managers and front lines, to figure out the how. So it's leaders doing the what, front lines doing the how. So we tend to have teams that are vice president and above for value stream mapping, and it's usually very big value streams. Order to delivery, more commonly order to cash, and actually very commonly now supply chain to warranty work or service work after the product's delivered. So they're very big chunks of the value stream. And every single time, after you convince leaders to spend their time doing this, every single time, what happens, we happen to do a 3-day model, but you could do any model. What happens in those 3 days is quite magical. Going in on day one, not one leader can clearly identify at a major macro level the flow of work and delivery of value to a customer. Kind of where does it go from what department to what department? Not even generally about metrics. We're not even asking that, just what's the work? How's the work flow? Not process level, high level. When you've got an entire leadership team where no one can articulate clearly how the flow of work is going, imagine the kinds of decisions that doesn't enable, or the kinds of decisions it does enable that are probably not the most accurate decisions to be making. Value stream mapping is another case, just like the strategy deployment plan, where it's simple and it's on one sheet of paper. One sheet of paper has a ton of power in and of itself for clarification purposes. One sheet of paper requires you to distill, to synthesize, to give the essential facts and nothing more. And it's a powerful clarification tool. So the value stream map is a second example of that one sheet of paper that can help clarify. Imagine being a new hire, and the first thing on day one, they get their orientation packet, and they also get a copy of a value stream map that says, you are here. Like a mall map or an airport map, you are here. This is how you connect with everyone else. This is how you connect to the customer. This is where your place is in our organization. It's a powerful thing for people to understand where they fit in. People want to connect. So value stream mapping is another great clarification tool that we don't use enough and need to use more often. Now, the A3 report. The A3 report. So the A3 report is one of those things that is probably one of the misunderstood and misused and sometimes even abused lean tool that has come out. And it's so powerful. Done well, it's so powerful. So I'd like to just share with you a little bit about how we view A3 reports, and in the hopes that you'll embrace some of this and boost you're already getting good results with it. You can get huge results if you boost a couple things. Number one, A3 reports are supposed to be a practice that has a problem solver, a problem owner, and a coach. They are not supposed to be done on their own, but by one person. They're not supposed to be done after the problem's solved either. The purpose of the coach is a seasoned person to help the problem solver clarify his or her thinking. The coach is supposed to be someone very well versed in problem solving, him or herself, and they're there to catch the problem solver thinking in their habitual patterns that need to be shifted a bit, and new neural pathways form for excellent problem solving to improve. And so when you are using these A3 reports in a way that they're not coached by a proficient person, then you're missing that ability to catch the thinking that you're trying to break and replace with a new habit. And the plan section, or if you use PDCA or PDSA, the plan section of an A3 report is the most critical part of the A3 report. Most of you know that. But what we don't see a lot of is that P section being very well synthesized and articulately, concisely stated on what the problem is and why it's a problem. So what we do see is a lot of rushing through it, and it kind of perpetuates the sloppy thinking that we're trying to identify and break and replace with new habits. So the A3 report is, there as a learning and development tool primarily. It's also there as a communication tool so that people can be clear on why does this matter and what are you learning. And it's there as a consensus building tool to help people see, do you see what I see? Do you see what I see? And have those conversations so that you get that level of clarity across a whole swath of the workforce, so that then you don't have resistance to improvement. If we do this all upright, the right way, there's usually very little resistance to improvement. That's what the A3 report is designed to do. It's to help smooth and get clarity around why are we doing this, why does it matter, what's the problem. Powerful tool. Then the next thing is, and this is something that has been an interesting journey, for those of you that have been on the lean path for a while, it's been kind of interesting to hear the criticism, between the lean and the Six Sigma world. It's been kind of interesting to hear, well, lean isn't as data-driven Six Sigma is, and there's that whole tit for tat, data, back and forth. And, no one suggested that I don't think anyone suggested in the beginning that lean was not data-driven. It is fact-based decision-making, and facts are data, and data are facts. And so, it's always meant to be that. But what's interesting is the more you start using data to clarify, the more you start seeing how unclear organizations and leaders are about the truth of the current state, So, for example, we had an organization we were working with, and they were having a customer problem due to an extensive backlog. And when we were planning this kind of focused problem-solving session, we asked, well, what's your demand? What's your incoming demand? And the first number we got was $12,000 a month. And then as time went on and we asked for some data and started kind of playing around with the data, then we saw that then they said it was $25,000 a month. And then as we kept asking questions, clarifying questions about the data, it ended up it was $37,000 a month. No wonder the backlog wasn't going down. It was staffed for $12,000. It was operating as though they had $12,000 a month, but they didn't. The other thing that happened was the actual backlog that the customer was told, they told him it was around 400, high 300s, 400 backlog, and they were getting through it. Yay, they were getting through it. But unfortunately, the actual backlog was 1,000 because as they were getting rid of the original backlog, that 37,000 was coming in and creating a higher backlog, and they weren't communicating that to the customer. And so you see how this clarification becomes a real important thing to understand what your numbers really are. Know thy numbers. Know thy numbers. We ask a lot, what's your demand? And just get a stare. And it's not good to know what your demand is not. This is the role of managers that are managing work. It's not necessarily the role of the improvement professional to know that. But it is the role of the improvement professional to help shape the organizational culture so that you have managers that can answer that question very clearly and very quickly. Everyone should know what the demand is in their department, on average, plus or minus. So this kind of data gathering, and in this case, what we had here was a situation where, if I had a dime for everybody that said, we don't have capacity, we don't have capacity, we need this, we need that, we need people, we need machines, we need this. And then you go in and you start doing the math. Know thy numbers. You start doing the math and you find out that there's capacity, it's just not being well utilized. So in this case, this happens to be a healthcare example, and in this case, we have, the green bars are the actual patient arrival times, the volume of patients coming in from 5 a.m. on. And then the blue lines are when the physicians are actually seeing patients, so they're registering and getting in to see the physician. And the red line is when they're scheduled to be there. The physicians are scheduled to be there. So you can clearly see, and no one could clearly see this until they were presented with this table, and we're teaching them how to do it now too, is that all you have to do is either switch one way or the other way. You could do some other fancy things, but the easier fix is switching either the physicians come in earlier, the patients come in later, and you figure out a way to match up. I mean, the little mountains actually line up if you just shift them a little bit. And so, this is one thing that if you aren't someone who regularly does data requests and kind of plays around with the data to get the clarity about the current state that you need to help teams and leaders make good decisions, then that would be another thing that I would put on your to-do list, is to learn a little more about getting data. And one of the other things that I find kind of are in our way as improvement professionals and leaders is that typically the improvement people know what they need and why they need it. And then the data people don't understand the operation, so they don't really know what they're asking for. And so very often you have this miscommunication about what data requirements really are and all that, and you have to go through a couple rounds. So the other thing I would recommend is getting operations and the data people together so that you're able to get teams able to get good information quickly so they can make good decisions. This level of clarity is very important. And last but certainly not least is people. And this is, a book unto itself. People, the level of clarity that we need or are obligated to provide for our workers is enormous. People, again, back to that innate curiosity, that innate need, we're hungry for clarity. If you don't give it to people, they check out. Or they make bad decisions. And neither one of them is good. And sometimes they do both, make bad decisions and check out. So what you want to do is start thinking about what are the needs of these people? What do they need to know? And if you don't know what they need to know, ask them what they want to know and need to know. What do you need to know? What would be helpful for you to know that would make you better able to perform at higher levels and, and feel good about your work? And go home at the end of the day feeling like, wow, I understand, and I finally, for the first time, understand why this is a big deal. I was at Starbucks the other day, and there were these two very young women sitting at a table, and they were kind of near where the coffees come out. And I overheard the one say, they just sat down, and the one said, oh my God, had such a great day yesterday. And I just immediately, do this because I love to study what are great days to people. And they said, the one girl said, I learned all about revenue and cost, and it's crazy how many our costs are so high. And it was fascinating to me that this is, someone in a business environment that is hearing for the first time, I don't know how long she was at the company, but she was hearing for the first time about the difference between revenue and expense, And a lot of people in business don't have business degrees, and so this is another area we can help clarify what our mission is as organizations and why profit matters in a respectable way. So even if you're in a nonprofit organization, people need to understand you got to reinvest in the business. You've got to have money to get new equipment and hire people and new technology. I mean, profit matters a lot. So giving people that level of clarity is important as well to understand what's going on. And then many of you probably have organizations that you regularly practice going to the Gemba or doing Gemba walks or something where people are able to get a better clarity about what's really going on in the organization. And yeah, until we started really practicing this a lot, I don't think I even appreciated. I mean, it made sense intellectually, but I don't think I appreciated the level of morale boosting and performance boosting that getting cross-functional teams together and seeing each other's problems creates. Once people see each other's problems, they become really motivated to help. In most cases, there's a rare case, but in most cases, people want to help. They want people to do well, and so being able to have it very visual for everyone to see, there's no smoke and mirrors, and then having people go there, whether it's frontline supervisors, managers, or even executive walks, and asking those questions of what are your obstacles here? How can we help? How can I help? That level of clarity is very healing for an organization. I'm a big believer that work doesn't have to be as hard as we make it, and clarity is one of the drivers that makes it so that it's not so dang hard. The other interesting question is, who owns this? When it comes to people and saying, who owns this value stream? Who owns this policy? Who owns this process? Who's running this meeting? What I think has happened is I think we've gotten into this environment where we're a little afraid to put the line in the sand, which ownership puts a line in the sand. It's a clear stake. Bob owns it. Sally owns it. It's a clear stake in the sand. There's no wiggle room. There's no ambiguity. And what a lot of organizations, I believe, are afraid of, from talking to lots and lots of leaders, middle managers, executives, and everything, is they're afraid to have that kind of stake in the sand that makes it feel like someone's going to go renegade and they're going to take over the process or take over the value stream. And that doesn't have to be at all the way it is. It's just the one person who's minding the store. It's the one person who you can go to and say, hey, something's not quite right. Is this on the radar to take a look at this? It's the one person who's making sure that all of the interconnections are working smoothly, and if they aren't, are pulling together a cross-functional team to do something about it. And so until we get clear ownership and kind of move away from being afraid of that level of line in the sand, stake in the ground, I don't think we're ever going to get really true cross-functional performance excellence. I don't think so. I think it takes this level of minding the store in order to get it. So, in short, there's a lot we can do to turn an environment from something where people are kind of rumbling around in a fog. They're trying their best to do well. Leaders are trying their best to make good decisions and be responsible to the board and to the customer. And everyone's trying to do their best. But what happens is, because we've got this kind of comfort with ambiguity, and possibly because we've gotten curiosity and clarity kind of drummed out of us, then we accept it. And I say, no, don't accept it. We shouldn't accept it. Lean is not asking us to accept it. In fact, Lean is asking us to bust through it and do something about it. So little by little, by implementing some of these tools to the degree that the best power that these tools have, if you're not using it to its full power and potential, then ramp it up a little bit. Amp it up. Light a fire under it. Get it working in a way that is going to help you clear the smoke and get levels of performance that you've never, ever thought you could achieve. Clarity is important from a safety perspective. It's important from a business success perspective. It's important from an employee morale perspective. And we should not tolerate the ambiguity that we have in organizations today. It's prevalent, it's a disease, and it needs to go bye-bye. So, in summary, we've got the tools. Clarity is the key to perform at high levels of performance. Ambiguity is what we got comfortable with. We got to get uncomfortable. We've got to start having candid conversations, frank conversations. We need to fully commit to clarity and create an intolerance for ambiguity, where you're constantly asking why not, what if, how could we? You're asking others to ask it. And if they ask it, you don't tamp them down because they're asking it. You honor it. And finally, ask questions about questions. It's powerful stuff. So with that, I'd like to honor you all and thank you for all the hard work you do. Business is changing. We are transforming, but we can always put the pedal to the metal a little more. So commit to clarity and watch yourselves soar. Thank you.